All right, welcome to a meeting of Vermont's Environmental Justice Advisory Council and Interagency Committee. All right, we have our community agreements that will just take a couple of minutes to read on our own, and then just give us a thumbs up when you've done that. Juliet, did we get thumbs up?
Thank you. Yeah, it looks like we got thumbs up from everybody. I'm sorry, I'm in the same room as Rachel right now, so she's kind of letting me speak for her or speak for myself.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I can't see anything at all, and I also can't track who's in the call as well. So
yeah,
just keep me updated with that. All right, so here's our agenda. We're gonna move in a minute or so into Rachel, our Associate General Counsel. She's amazing. She's here to share about cumulative environmental burden rulemaking. And then also, if you all want to move into executive session later, she'll also be supporting us in that discussion. So we'll take about 20 minutes to do the presentation. And then we'll take some time, about 30 minutes, just for Q&A. If there's members of the public on the call, we'll break for that. We can take a 5-minute break, just in case, we do go into executive session. You'll probably want to break before doing that. And then Rachel will do another short executive session recap, because the advisory council did go into executive session to look at the community engagement mapping tool RFP. And then you all will have a moment to deliberate and then vote, and then we'll move into executive session. So just checking, do we have quorum? If we do,
you're muted.
We have quorum for the interagency committee, but we currently have 4 advisory council members on the call, so we still need 2 to achieve quorum. So I think we can return to the meeting minutes when we have quorum.
Okay, sounds good. All right, I'm gonna pass it over to Rachel.
Thank you, Kim. Just want to kind of reintroduce myself to the group. I know several of you, but may not know everybody. My name is Rachel Stevens. I'm an attorney that works at Agency of Natural Resources. I support the Civil Rights and Environmental Justice Unit at ANR. I also have extensive experience working on environmental justice and civil rights issues. I worked at the Environmental Justice Law Clinic at the law school for about 8 years, doing pro bono representation for communities. Through that experience, I worked a lot on looking at state EJ laws and specifically on what we're going to talk about today, which are cumulative impacts or cumulative environmental burden rules. So hence my giving you kind of this introduction to this deliverable. My goal is to just describe what the environmental justice law says about this deliverable, try to break it down for you. And then, again, this is just an introduction conversation. No need for decisions today. This is just to start to familiarize yourself with a new deliverable that you'll be discussing, over the coming months and years. Next slide, Kim. Okay, perfect. So the first question I wanted to answer is, what is a rule? A rule, also known as a regulation, you can use the terms interchangeably. They have the force of law and are created by administrative agencies to implement and enforce a law. You might hear us use the term rulemaking. Rulemaking refers to the process of adopting or amending a rule. And the purpose of a rule is usually to provide interpretation or more specific detail or technical information about how a law should be implemented or applied in a specific set of situations. There's rules on all types of topics: Clean Water Act, regulations, where to build infrastructure. And so a rule, it has the force of law, it can be enforced, and is created by a state agency. Next slide. So what is the process for adopting a rule? There's a very lengthy description of the process described in what's called the Vermont Administrative Procedure Act, or the APA. I put the citation here. That has a detailed description of every step that an agency needs to take in order to adopt a rule. If you are interested in this process, I highly recommend that you take a look. The Vermont EJ law also has some specific procedural requirements for adopting this rule that are described in the EJ law section 6005, and we'll talk a little bit about those details. So who are the key players during a rulemaking process? Obviously, the state agency that adopts a rule, because only agencies can adopt rules. Draft rules must receive public comment, so the public plays a key role in providing input, and other interested organizations or members of the public. And then there's two official bodies that are formed that also have an official role in adopting a rule. The first is called the Interagency Committee on Administrative Rules, known as ICAR. And the second is a Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules, known as LCAR. ICAR is made up of members of other state agencies that review a rule to determine if it has sufficient, public participation planned and is consistent with the law. The LCAR is a body, it's a legislative committee made up of senators and representatives in the General Assembly, and they review a draft rule to determine if it's consistent with legislative authority. Next slide. So what is the role of the advisory council? As I mentioned, the EJ law has a really specific description of the official role of the advisory council for this particular rule that we're going to talk about today. It's set out in section 3 VSA 6005C. I've put the most pertinent sections here on the slide. The first is that prior to drafting any new rules, the covered agencies must consult with the advisory council to discuss the scope and proposed content of rules to be developed. So scoping is kind of a term used usually to refer to kind of early in the process, identifying issues that should be included in a rule. So the scope of the rule, how broad is it, what kind of issues will it apply to? So at some point, we'll have an official kind of scoping meeting with the advisory council to discuss the rule. Agencies must submit draft rulemaking concepts to the advisory council for review and comment. So this will happen before the official scoping meeting. A&R and other agencies can submit kind of some ideas or concepts to consider for the scoping. Once a proposed rule is ready to be filed, the agency has to fill out what are called APA filing forms. APA, remember, is the Administrative Procedure Act filing forms. And we must provide those forms to the advisory council 45 days prior to filing the proposed rule and initiating the process with ICAR. So there will be formal notice to the advisory council before any proposed rule is filed. Once that the advisory council receives the proposed package, they can review it. They have 45 days. And then the law says that each advisory council member must vote and record individual members' support or objection to the rule. That objection or vote of support will be filed with the rule as part of the rulemaking record. So once the advisory council votes in favor or against the rule, that will be recorded and be submitted and follow the rule through the process. Next slide. So what is the role of the Interagency Advisory Committee? The Interagency Committee should consult with the agency in the development of the cumulative environmental burdens rule. The reason this is so important to get input early is because once ANR adopts this rule, all covered agencies have 1 year to adopt or amend policies, procedures, plans, guidance, and other rules to implement this chapter. So there's kind of a trigger effect that once our agency adopts this cumulative environmental burdens rule, which we're going to talk about, other agencies have 1 year to adopt that rule. And I think that the deadline for ANR's rule is July 1st, 2027, which would mean covered agencies have until July 1st, 2028 to ensure that their rules and procedures conform to the ANR rule. Next slide. One more thing I'll say is that this is the one and only rule contemplated in the EJ law. So it's really important that we talk and make sure that we're on the same page as we progress through this process. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat so we can make sure that we address them. So I wanted to call your attention to the Vermont EJ policy that's outlined in the law, because it provides a really good foundational explanation of why this rule is necessary. The rule is intended to implement the bold section of the policy that I have here. So it is the policy of the state of Vermont that no segment of the population of the state should, because of its racial, cultural, or economic makeup, bear a disproportionate share of environmental burdens or be denied an equitable share of environmental benefits. But the bold section here of disproportionate environmental burdens is what we're trying to avoid by implementing this rule. Next slide. Hope I see a comment in the chat. Each agency probably has their own policy process for updating documents, policies, procedures. How is that being accounted for in the 1 year deadline? It is not actually accounted for in the 1 year deadline. So this is something that this is a really good question, Grace, and we can talk about this in a future IAC meeting about how that trigger should happen. Like, how can covered agencies adopt the rule if, for example, it's off cycle for when you anticipate adopting a rule. But there is some precedent for a rule like this. One example is in the Department of Environmental Conservation. We have the Groundwater Protection and Prevention Rule, which required other divisions to amend their rules in order to conform to that rule. So I think that's
Okay,
a really
thank
important.
you.
Yeah, that's a really important point, though. So let's make sure to revisit this. Maybe if we do a deeper dive in an IAC meeting, we could dig into that, like how that might work.
Awesome, thank you.
So what is this required consideration that's mentioned? So I want you to just take a look. Here's the citation to the EJ law. It's in 3 VSA 6004B. And it says that the covered agencies shall consider cumulative environmental burdens as defined by rule and access to environmental benefits when making decisions about the environment, energy, climate, and public health projects, facilities and infrastructure, and associated funding. Obviously, this is drafted very broadly, and it's intended to apply to any decisions related to the environment, energy, climate, public health, etc. Okay, next slide. So this is the explicit rulemaking section of the EJ law that describes in detail the deadline and what the rule must accomplish. It says that the rule is due on or before July 1st, 2027. The Agency of Natural Resources, in consultation with the Advisory Council and the IAC, shall adopt rules to do 3 things. Number 1, define cumulative environmental burdens. Number 2, implement the consideration of environmental burdens within the Agency of Natural Resources. So this rule will not direct how other agencies are required to consider. It will define cumulative environmental burdens, and it will outline how the Agency of Natural Resources will implement cumulative environmental burdens, and then it will inform how the public and other covered agencies implement. So it's our rule will be binding on our agency, but it also has an important effect on other agencies because it will inform how the other covered agencies should implement a consideration. It also will include information about how the public or covered agencies should use the environmental justice mapping tool, or how it's intended to be used. Juliet?
You just really quick provide like a 1 or 2 plain language explanation of what consideration of cumulative environmental burdens means in the context of this?
Yeah, so the key word there is consideration, and consideration has a kind of a common meaning, meaning like an evaluation or incorporating this as a factor in decision making. There's no other guidance about what the consideration actually should be. There's examples of like assessments or other tools that we could look to from other states in terms of how do other states consider this. But I think this will be a big topic of discussion in the scoping meeting, is what do we mean by consideration? So I don't want to, there's not a clear definition of what it means in this context, but we have some examples that we can look to provide some options for what it might be able to mean in Vermont. I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but okay. All of this is kind of TBD in terms of to be determined discussions that we can have about what the rule should do. And then, as I mentioned, Grace, to your point, the law has a 1-year requirement. It does say, July 1st, 2028, and as appropriate thereafter, covered agencies should amend and update policies to be consistent with this consideration. So we can dive in deeper a little bit more about what this means. How would you know? How would you make that determination in terms of what needs to be updated or not?
Yeah, sorry, one more thing. Is there anything in the law about, similar to the EBSG, like rationale for what programs need to be updated and what programs don't need to be updated? Or is that something that we'll probably flesh out as like?
I think that's one thing we'll flesh out. And maybe, Kim, could you back up one slide? The only thing that we have in terms of guidance about where this consideration is applicable is this section of the law, 6004.
Okay.
Which talks about, these types of decisions. So it's obviously broadly applicable, but this is all the guidance that we have. So I do think, within each agency, and I'm sure this rule will provide some guidance about how this applies, but you'll have to think about how do you think this fits into your agencies and the types of decisions that you make. So there could be questions of, what types of decisions does this apply to? And how it affects different types of decision making in your agencies might differ. So, for example, Agency of Natural Resources issues a lot of permits related to environmental pollution. So that's like an obvious decision that would apply, but it might not be as apparent in a different agency or a different context. So applicability and the scope of decisions that this applies to will be a big topic of discussion in thinking about the scope of the rule.
Thank you.
Carla?
Yes, Grace, I appreciate all of your questions. And I also want to share that as we did with the baseline report guidance, we will have many conversations around this one deliverable. It is very unique in nature, and so it'll be treated as so. So yeah, all of those questions, Grace, we will seek to answer as a collective and provide guidance on before we continue moving forward to later steps in the process. But thank you
Awesome.
so much for, yes, I just wanted to share that because I know it seems overwhelming because it is.
It
But
does.
yes, please rest assured that we will have many conversations about this one deliverable. This is an introduction, just so we're all on the same page and talking about the same things.
Thank you.
Okay, Kim, I think we can advance 2 slides.
Really just want to pause for a second, because I know that probably advisory council members probably have some questions. Not that we need to stop for questions, but I'm wondering if you'd be willing to go back to that earlier slide that explains how the AC will be involved, because I think that might help folks follow along a little bit at this point.
Okay, sure. Yeah, we can look at that one
Okay.
more time.
Okay. Just because
So-
we just went through.
Yeah, so a lot of these discussions, like what we're talking about, like which decisions will this apply to? What does consideration mean? What does cumulative mean? All of this will be discussed, as you can see here, in a scoping meeting, which is not today's meeting. Today is just an introduction to the law. But I think what we anticipate is that we may have in the future a more substantive meeting where in advance of that meeting, there's some draft concepts that the AC can consider and think about, these are the options. These are the different ways that this could be interpreted. These are the different types of decisions this could apply to, and to consider that. So all of this on the screen is the formal process for AC engagement. And there's a lot of opportunities for input in terms of each of these kind of micro decisions embedded in the rule. So obviously, we'll have a consultation. We'll talk about the proposed scope, any feedback about content of the rules. The agency has to provide the advisory council with draft rulemaking concepts for review and comment and consideration, so we can get formal feedback that's kind of in writing. And then the formal proposal will be submitted to the AC before anything is filed. So definitely a lot of opportunity for input and engagement. And obviously this is specific to the advisory council, but because the rule has such a significant effect on the covered agencies will obviously need to be heavily involved in consulting on the rule as well.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, so the first bullet that we just saw for the first goal of the rule is to define cumulative environmental burdens. Now, fortunately, environmental burdens is already defined in the law, so that will not be changing. The environmental burdens definition is in 3 VSA section 6002, and it's listed here on the screen. I won't read it, but it's a pretty broad definition of burdens. There's several examples listed in the law itself. So we already know what an environmental burden is. And the objective of the rule is to really define what cumulative environmental burdens means. Keep moving. Oh, go ahead, Juliet.
Sorry, just really quick, could you maybe share like 1 or 2 synonyms to the word cumulative, just to help if folks don't already know what the word cumulative
Yeah, well, let's hold that for the next slide, because I think we have a couple examples of cumulative. But I guess another way to say burdens, just for this slide, might be the term like impact. So you might hear cumulative impact is another shorthand for burdens. Okay, there's a lot on this slide, but this is where I want to provide some examples. I want to just mention there are many, many potential definitions of cumulative, to your point, Juliet,
Thank you.
in many different contexts. So one thing that we have, and actually when we're on our break, I'm going to put a resource in the chat so you can see every single state's cumulative environmental burdens rule. There's a great database that's actually maintained by New York, or the New School in New York. And they have each definition from every other state, and it's a publicly available resource. So we can link that table in the chat so you can see some different examples. But what I've put here on the screen is a potential example of a definition pulled from actually the Environmental Protection Agency under the Biden administration, had kind of a working definition of cumulative, what they called cumulative impacts. And it essentially refers to the total burden of exposure to a combination of multiple stressors and their effects on health, well-being, and quality of life. So cumulative implies looking at sources of pollution, potentially multiple sources of pollution, and as opposed to looking at each individual source. So here, if you look on the right side, we have kind of 3 different ways that you could interpret cumulative. And maybe cumulative is all of these things, but one example is cumulative might be exposure to multiple environmental burdens or sources of pollution. So for example, think about an individual person that lives in a community and that community is affected by diesel emissions from traffic, plus an industrial facility that has a air permit and air pollution, plus a landfill, plus potential contaminated drinking water. This is kind of orienting the review around an individual human and the level of exposure that they may be experiencing in their daily life. So we're looking at multiple potential sources. Another example of cumulative could be exposure to multiple different types of pollution. So here we're just looking at kind of the chemical pollution constituents that somebody might be exposed to. So for example, somebody might be exposed to PFAS and particulate matter and benzene and lead from maybe multiple sources. But considering what is the cumulative effect of exposure to multiple pollutants could be one version of cumulative. Another version of cumulative, and again, this is just looking at examples across the other states and how this has been applied in those states, is pollution burdens plus social vulnerability. So looking at the pollution exposure we just talked about, but also looking at indicators of social vulnerability, such as poverty, lack of access to transportation or housing or healthcare, because we know that all of these social vulnerabilities, these indicators, make an individual person more susceptible to adverse health impacts from pollution. So this could be relevant to, for example, using, if we think about like the mapping tool, for example, that's being developed, the mapping tool may show environmental burdens on a map in a geographic way, and could also show demographic information to help us understand, is a source of pollution being concentrated in an area where there are other sources of pollution, or is it being concentrated in a community that has a higher level of poverty, such that that community might be more vulnerable to the pollution being introduced in that community. This is, again, going to be a big topic of discussion among the advisory council and the interagency committee. So what I'm offering here is just an example to show you what could be the potential scope. This is not a recommendation. This is all up for discussion. I'm just trying to provide you some, get your wheels turning about what this might mean, what this could look like. So why don't I pause here? I feel like this is kind of a meaty slide. Just want to make sure, maybe get some reactions. I've maybe just shocked everyone.
Yeah, we invite questions. We have Rachel. She's an incredible resource. She has experience in this area of work. Any questions? This really goes to the core of what environmental justice is as a movement and as an area of work. Brittany?
So I'm curious if there's a way to, like, if these burdens can be like weighted in a sense. So then when you're going to review these burdens and trying to prioritize communities, is that in the works, or is that to come, or am I?
That's definitely something, yeah, to put on the table. I think, I do think there is some, if you go back to the other slide, Kim. So I think, Brittany, that's a great point, and all of this is up for discussion. If you see this definition of environmental burdens, it kind of implies some prioritization because it mentions not just any impact to a natural resource, it mentions significant impacts. So there's kind of already buried in these definitions some indication that something might be a burden, but that some burdens might be more burdensome than others. And so how do we account for that and factor that in, I think will be a big topic of discussion and will be relevant to kind of the mapping tool as well. And what the capabilities that we can get from a tool like that will be really helpful. So really good point. I don't, as I said, no decisions have been made, but this is all kind of, it's helpful to hear your questions too, because that will help us think through what decisions do we actually need to make, and thinking about not all burdens are created equal is going to be an important point when we think about how to do an assessment like this. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think just to highlight that's a good point.
Grace?
Yes, thank you. This might be too in the weeds, but I just wanted to point out, or I guess ask a question about the social vulnerabilities, because I know, and Amy is here, so she might be able to jump in. The Department of Health has a whole social vulnerability framework that they were analyzing. I know they were like county by county demographics done. I don't know how drilled down it is, but I think using something like that could be helpful. But I guess my question is, has there been any thought about like what information to use to determine the burdens? Like, are we using like a state framework like the Department of Health, or, and again, this is probably too in the weeds, but
No,
just
I
wanted to
think
put it
this
out
is a
there.
good point. And I guess this is a really good, maybe can you go to the next slide just so we can see the cumulative slide. This is definitely, and I guess I defer to Kim in terms of process, but what you're flagging about the social vulnerability index is a really important discussion for development of the mapping tool, which is underway. The agency has retained a contractor to do that work. And so some of the discussion about the criteria or the indices or how burdens are going to be represented in the map, and then what other like social vulnerabilities might be able to appear in the map. Like there's some potential for integrating or aggregating existing tools into a universal mapping tool. So maybe I would defer to Kim on how you want input on the mapping tool development, but I know that's definitely part of that conversation.
Yeah, conversations to come.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
So yeah, so the mapping tool is obviously a more of a technical tool, but
Mhm.
it's really it's relevant to the rule because
Mhm.
our assessment is only as good as the tools we have to do an assessment. And so I think there's kind of some parallel conversations that are going to be happening, which is another reason why I think it was a good time to go ahead and introduce this rule to the group, so that you could be having this in mind as the mapping tool is being developed.
Carla, before you jump in, oh, sorry, go ahead, Kim.
Rachel, how many more slides do you have?
I think just, oh, 2.
2. Okay, cool.
Should we just hit those really quick and maybe we take our break?
Oh no, I just really want to be attentive to the fact that the AC is on the call as well. And so just want to make sure that our questions don't get too in the weeds, because I think that could potentially make it more difficult to have more of the overarching kind of conversation that we need so that the advisory council, at a later date, like when they're needing to support the scoping process, have all their questions answered. So I just wanted to throw that out there for consideration.
Yes, thank you, Kim, for that. Very important. But I want to answer the question about the social vulnerability index, because this is something that we actually discussed with the advisory council when the council had the opportunity to look at the request for proposals. There's a section in which we ask proponents to do an assessment of existing tools and how they could inform or be incorporated into the mapping tool. So as Rachel indicated, the question about other existing tools and data that are available in Vermont will be taken into consideration not only to inform this rule, the cumulative environmental burden rule, but also the development of the mapping tool. And those conversations will be had as well with the advisory council when the 2 contractors start meeting with you all.
That's okay.
So thank you. And I would like to invite questions from the advisory council members who are in the call. There are 2 more slides to go, but if you have any questions, please, this is a good opportunity to ask foundational questions that you may have regarding the deliverable.
Okay. Yeah, feel free to ask questions. I'm putting the database of all the other state policies that relate to this topic in the chat. I just want to point out that each state has a very different environmental justice law that they're implementing. So just because something exists in another state doesn't mean that it's going to be the same as what happens in Vermont. Mariana, I see your question in the chat. Who is going to be writing and developing the rule? So the Agency of Natural Resources is responsible for adopting the rule, but there's extensive consultation and input anticipated from both the Advisory Council and the Interagency Committee. But the Agency of Natural Resources would be the entity that adopts the rule. Okay. So how will the cumulative environmental burden rule impact state agencies? As I mentioned, there's kind of two aspects. The first is the law requires covered agencies to consider cumulative environmental burdens as defined by rule. And then it also requires covered agencies to adopt and amend their policies, procedures, guidance, and rules where applicable to implement the chapter. So if a rule change or a procedure change is necessary to allow for this consideration, then the law contemplates that change should happen. So I would say there's a pretty direct, significant impact on covered agencies in terms of process. The timing is, as it says here, July 1st, 2028 to adopt or amend. So we have some time, and obviously we're introducing the rule now, and it will be adopted by July 1st, 27. But just flagging that it will have an immediate, not immediate, but an impact on covered agencies in the future. So how will this rule impact the public? So in a few ways, the rule will inform how the public and covered agencies implement the consideration of cumulative environmental burdens and use the mapping tool, because that's one of the objectives of and purposes of the rule is to provide guidance about the mapping tool and the consideration. But the rule will also ensure that covered agencies consider cumulative environmental burdens that may impact the public. So there is an impact that will be felt by the public in that there's a kind of a new consideration that agencies will be making when they're making decisions. And obviously the purpose of that is to implement the EJ policy to ensure that burdens are not being felt disproportionately across the state. So it is intended to have a positive impact on the public, in that it's avoiding or helping to consider the burdens that may be distributed across the state. I think, is that my last slide, Kim?
Yeah.
Oh, you're on mute, Kim.
Thank you. Yep, that was your last line. So I think it makes sense to take a break. Thank you so much, Rachel. And then start with advisory council questions. Just give everyone a minute to.
We take a break, but Mariana put a great question in the chat. So whenever we're ready, Kim, I'll take her question.
Okay, go ahead.
So Mariana, you asked, cumulative burdens are currently not considered already in any way or law. That's actually not true. So one thing that's really interesting is that there are many places in existing law where a cumulative environmental impact is already considered. And so one of the things that we've been thinking about in the agency is kind of inventorying kind of existing decisions at Agency of Natural Resources to try to understand where cumulative impacts are relevant. This might be a really interesting discussion too, for example, with Department of Public Health, because a lot of our like environmental standards or health-based standards already consider cumulative environmental impacts. So I definitely don't want to suggest that this is not already happening, and that is going to be an important thing to figure out. How does this relate to some existing decisions? But there are certain decisions that don't consider them. And so this rule would kind of broaden the applicability, but certainly in the environmental agencies, there's already consideration in several contexts. Does that answer your question? Okay. So I'm seeing, yep, Carla made a comment in the chat. Yep, we're seeking input on the rule. Okay. Other ACE Advisory Council member questions? Brittany?
This is Brittany. Yeah, thanks. I'm curious how these cumulative burdens are going to be tracked and stored, and then if there's going to be a public facing site that is going to be maintained for Vermonters to be able to see.
I think that's a great point and a great comment. The environmental burdens will be mapped in the mapping tool, but right now we have not, I mean, we're at the very beginning stages, so we haven't really figured out how or whether cumulative environmental burdens could be reflected in the mapping tool. I think that's still a topic for discussion, and certainly that's a good comment. If the outcome of an assessment will be made public or should be made public during the process. So that's definitely, that's a great piece of feedback and something that we should definitely consider. I'll just give an example of in the state of California, they have a mapping tool called the Cal Enviro Screen. And actually anybody can generate and view cumulative environmental impacts in Cal Enviro Screen because the tool itself actually creates a score of cumulative environmental effects. Kind of, if folks are folks familiar with the EPA EJ screen, that it's been taken down, but it's a federal mapping tool. It's similar to kind of the EJ score that the mapping tool could generate kind of a score. So I think, Brittany, there's a lot to think about in terms of how to document and make available to the public cumulative environmental burden. So just opening that up, that's a great comment and something to consider. Carla?
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Brittany. This conversation has been really informative because the questions that you're asking allow us to have a sense, an idea of what concerns you all have with regards to this rule and other areas that may inform this rule. So thank you so much. And Brittany, what I was going to mention is that is a great question. We, as Rachel indicated, we don't know whether that's actually going to be one of the things that we're able to do with our tool. This is going to be the first iteration of that tool, but at a minimum, the burdens the burdens that make it to the tool after a process of engagement and consultation with the advisory council and other agencies and other stakeholders around the state, will have burdens, and you will be able to identify burdens and overlay them. So even if we don't get like a cumulative burden assessment report, we will be able to identify per burden and geography where those burdens are accumulated at a minimum. That's the most basic iteration of a potential tool.
Yeah, and some tools use just another example. Some tools have like kind of hotspots where, like, as you add layers, it changes the color gradation on the map, so you can actually see, oh, you're having a higher concentrate. So the map, that's just another example of a functionality that could, where depending on how you want to maybe prioritize burdens or evaluate them, that as you use different layers, it shows, oh, you have a zone of high concentration or high density, or you have high, there's a really great example mapping tool in New Jersey, the What's in My Community tool, that kind of has some of that functionality. So these are all like potential options and things to think about for Vermont's tool. And as Carla mentioned, there'll be a first iteration, but then there's potential to improve or adjust the tool, over time based on what needs the state has for something like that. Kim?
Hi, I'm sorry, I'm joining from my phone. Sorry to jump in. Could I ask a question? This is Jennifer Byrne.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, great. So more just a comment, I guess, but thinking about like permits and considering them within this data collection of burdens. And my hope would be that even the first iteration of the mapping tool would include like a community component, community facing component, where they would be able to see something like all the permits that exist in their community. I feel like that would be a really useful tool, even just starting with that, because every permit is some type of basically license to pollute and is some type of burden to the community, and could kind of blend the community engagement component with the environmental burden.
Yeah, that's a great comment, and definitely the permits. Yeah, the permits are a great point. And actually the New Jersey tool, as I was mentioning, is very useful for permits. It's primarily identifying the pollution permits in the state. So that could be a good, if you're looking for an example of a functionality that you might like. But yeah, I think all of this is in consideration for Vermont. So great comment. Thank you, Jennifer. Kim, did you have anything else? Take more questions?
No, we have 5 more minutes for this Q&A, so I just want to leave it open. In the meantime, I'm going to reach out to Walter. It seems like he had some issues hopping on the call, so I'm just going to support him, and then we can transition into the executive session discussion.
Can we do IAC questions, Kim? I'm seeing some.
Sure. Yeah, sure. We can do that.
Claire?
Thanks. I'm just curious, it didn't seem like there's any language about this in statute, but if there's examples around like the time scale over which burden is experienced, like it seems like a lot of the examples we're talking about are like current, but I'm curious if there's been thought about historical or how that might factor
Yes,
in.
actually, I'm glad you mentioned that. That question has come up in almost every meeting that I have been in about this topic, is what is the time scale? So how far back do we look? So for example, you might have a facility that's no longer operating, but that did operate in the past. And so that is something that we've been thinking about. How do we account for that? And there is not guidance in the law, but certainly we'd have to think about that when we discuss what is cumulative. So there's cumulative in terms of the current condition, but then considering the historical impact of an area. Yeah, brownfield sites, for example, in terms of time scale. So time scale is a very relevant topic to what is cumulative. So that's something for us to think through, for sure. Other questions or comments? I hope I haven't overwhelmed everyone into silence. Abby?
Yeah, thanks. My question, and maybe there's 2 parts to my question. The first is kind of I'm curious about whether there has been an effort discussed around capturing cumulative burden or impact across state agency efforts. So like one agency could be doing a project on a parcel and then another agency could be doing something similar that they haven't communicated about. And then I was wondering about if that's what the mapping tool is intended to kind of address. And then that led to my second question around the mapping tool, of really feeling like I may have some kind of just like general questions around population of the mapping tool that I hadn't been thinking about. I knew that it was being developed. I hadn't necessarily thought about like data input across covered agencies.
All really good feedback. I've definitely been in a meeting where we flagged kind of the cross-agency, some of that, like, just I guess for the group, there are many different divisions even just within our agency of natural resources that may affect a certain community and don't always necessarily like speak to one another. So for example, a wastewater treatment facility in a town, but also at the same time is getting a permit. And then separately, a facility is like amending or modifying a permit for like an air pollution source. And then sometimes you have a source that needs multiple permits from many different divisions or maybe many different agencies. And so that's definitely an interesting concept. It might be interesting, not necessarily putting you on the spot, Jenny, but if we have representation from the LURB, the Land Use Review Board, to think about obviously some of that cross agency kind of impact. So definitely an important point. And then I guess Carla or Kim, how should folks on this call give input on the mapping tool? Because I think that is emerging as a hot topic too from this discussion.
Yes, thank you. Abby and Jennifer, I loved your comments. And what I have to say about Jennifer's comment, the permits, that's definitely a topic of conversation that will be had. And Abby, I love the opportunity that the mapping tool exercise may bring us in terms of creating efficiencies across agencies and thinking perhaps how we can do that may be of importance. But then again, we have not started having these conversations. So let's just keep track. We were going to have the minutes, so let's just keep track of all of the questions that have been shared today so that we are able to have them with the contractors to determine, what's within the realm of possibilities. Because another thing that we should be mindful of is our budget, right? And our budget is kind of limited. So we will need to have conversations about what things we are going to prioritize in this first iteration of the mapping tool. And in terms of providing feedback, we've mentioned this in the past. Our email is I was gonna say like a revolving door, but always open to receiving feedback or questions across the board with regards to the EJ law or specifically for any of the deliverables. So as questions or ideas arise, please let us know. Send us an email and we will get back to you and make sure that we discuss these questions with the contractors. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're maybe close to break time, but just want to recap a couple things. Welcome input on all of this. There will be a formal scoping meeting, based on the law, with the advisory council to scope. So this is just your introduction conversation. This is not the formal scoping meeting. So you'll have a lot of time to think about this. And then in advance of a scoping meeting, we'll circulate some materials so you can kind of have a little more kind of meaty or substantive level of engagement on some options and things to consider. I know folks are really busy, but there's this great online database of all the other cumulative impact policies in other states that's developed by the Tishman Center at the New School. Highly recommend you poke around. And for the covered agencies, if you have a counterpart, in those states and you're interested in talking to them or, engaging, definitely just recommend you take a look at what kind of other states are doing. And then Carla, what kind of expectation do you want to set for next steps? Or maybe Kim, do you have any other expectations you want to set for next steps for this conversation on cumulative environmental burden rule?
Thank you. I think the next steps which are also the prior steps to this conversation is to familiarize yourself with the deliverable, go over the statute and let us know if any questions arise. Now, be on the lookout for interagency committees. We will hold technical assistance sessions to have conversations with you all with regards to scope and other considerations like operationalizing what may become part of the rule. So that's something of importance to start having conversations internally with relevant staff and leadership within your agency, so that you can come and inform our conversations regarding scoping when we have them. And similarly with the advisory council, it would be great if you could share with us some of the important values and items that you would like to see folded into a rule of this nature.
Yeah, Abby, actually, this is a topic that has come up a lot about getting the general counsels in a room. And so I've actually met with the AG's office to think about how we could have a bigger like legal conversation. So either having them join the program staff or having a dedicated legal meeting. So that's a great idea. We've been thinking about that. So happy to offer that. And maybe we could think about how to facilitate that. But welcome that opportunity.
Also, advisory council members, there will be a scoping measure, a formal scoping meeting that's going to be public. And I would also like to offer the advisory council that if you would benefit from another conversation prior to that formal scoping meeting, to go over the deliverable again and any other questions that you may have, please let us know. We're more than happy to provide that.
Yeah, one thing we could do in a follow-up conversation or maybe some office hours is like we could pull out some of these other state examples and do like a deeper dive in some of those other states if you want, just to take a look at like what other states might be doing. I have found that to be really informative. So if that, just think about what kind of, as Carla mentioned, if there's additional information that you would appreciate having presented to you, definitely let Carla know and we can make sure that we have that information prepared.
Please, and this is particularly important because we're gonna consult the advisory council and you will provide your feedback and we will take your feedback into consideration to inform the rule. So the more you know about the subject matter, the better the consultation process will be for us. So yes, if you have any questions, let us know, please.
Okay. Let's take a 5-minute break. I have Trey on standby, so after Rachel, you come back and we do your slide, excuse me, around executive session, then I can call him and then the AC will be at quorum.
Just want to acknowledge for the record that I don't think we have any members of the public on. This is probably when we would have done public comment, but I don't think we have any members of the public at this time.
No, we don't. Sounds good. Okay, let's come back at 1:11.
I think we're intending for the executive session to include the interagency committee. And I think this would be a very important conversation for the covered agencies to hear.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Correct. This is a joint executive session, and it's particularly important for all of us to be there.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
All right, everyone, it's 1:11.
Claire, I like your sweater.
Thank you. That's a great compliment from someone who often has excellent sweaters.
Oh, thank you. Oh my gosh, I'm blushing. Wow, I was not expecting that.
Thanks, Rachel.
Sorry, I'm struggling a little bit.
No worries. I think everyone's back, so let's get started.
Okay, so give me 1 second. I'm gonna share my screen. I don't know how to just ignore my tabs. Okay, so we're going to talk about an option for executive session for this group. Just wanted to point to Vermont's open meeting law. An executive session allows a body to meet privately without the public. The purpose of an executive session is to discuss matters where, quote, premature public knowledge would clearly place the public body at a substantial disadvantage. And then 2 examples that are relevant. One, these are all listed in the open meeting law. One is contracts, one is confidential attorney-client communications. The team, Kim, Julia, and Carla flagged that this could be a useful discussion based on some conversations that have been happening recently, to have an executive session to discuss some of the legal issues related to the environmental justice focused population definition, and to allow the advisory council and the interagency committee to discuss information confidentially with an attorney. So this is the proposal for the executive session. If the group wants to proceed, that we would enter into an executive session and I can share some confidential legal information with the group. Well, I guess let me pause here. I think this is wanted to open this up. Go ahead, Kim.
Yeah, real quick. So if you advance a slide after AC deliberation, just so if you want to share a little bit about the procedure real quick, and then
Yep.
folks, I think, can deliberate.
Yes. Okay, so in terms of procedure, if the bodies decide to enter into executive session, someone must make a motion in the open session that indicates the reason for doing so and name the legal authority. And I've put the legal authority here. For a state body, a 2/3 affirmative vote is required. No other topics may be discussed in executive session, and information shared in executive sessions should not be shared publicly. This is very important to understand. So we will have a discussion, or we can have a discussion in executive session, but then it cannot be discussed separately, or, for example, put in an email that then would be made public. If the group is interested in this, I've drafted a sample motion for someone to enter into the record, but want to make sure that there's time for discussion and deliberation about whether executive session is warranted.
Why is it being proposed as warranted?
So to further discuss legal issues related to the environmental justice focused population definition in a confidential setting, this would be an opportunity for the agency to share some information about legal interpretation and discussions that we're having about the definition that otherwise can't be shared publicly.
Yeah, I guess I just don't really understand like the why it can't, like why is any of this not able to be talked about, or what is the like unfair disadvantage or advantage that may be presented?
I think that discussing the information publicly could make the law potentially vulnerable to legal challenge. And I think the purpose would be to discuss information with the group that's important for your decision making without exposing the state to potential legal risk from someone wanting to challenge the law. it's essentially an opportunity to discuss legal risks that the agency has identified.
And so you don't want to warn people about the risks you see, is that it?
I think we want to warn the advisory council and the interagency committee, and we could discuss whether after we share the information that you think it's important for us to discuss it publicly. But I think at this time, at least the lawyers involved have identified it as confidential and would not want to be shared in a public forum.
So as a matter of process, Rachel, does the motion need to be supported unanimously? Because Jennifer, I think you reserve your right to not want to enter into executive session, but I would like the advice of Rachel.
I think it's two-thirds vote.
Okay.
Of the bodies.
So I think we can move forward. Rachel.
But I guess if there are other questions, though, I mean, it's important
Sure.
for the group to understand the purpose and whether, Jennifer, you did raise a good point about what is the substantial disadvantage. I mean, that finding does need to be made. And it's a little hard for me to say. I mean, I feel confident that sharing this information prematurely would put the advisory council and the interagency committee at a substantial disadvantage. But if after we have the executive session, you disagree and you think that we should have a follow-up conversation in a public forum, we could definitely talk about that. And I could get legal advice from the Attorney General's office on that point. If you find after we discuss it that you think it's important to discuss publicly.
My concern, Jennifer, is that unfortunately, we cannot answer your question to your satisfaction because it would actually go into the matters that we've been advised by legal counsel to be extremely sensitive. So it does require at this point a little bit of trust in, the advice of Kim, Juliet, and I, and also the legal opinion of Rachel, our general counsel, and other general counsels from the interagency. But if you have more questions, please share them. I just don't know whether the answers will be satisfactory because I believe it may jeopardize the information that we don't want to share publicly.
I can only asking these questions. I have no opinion on it because I don't know what it's about, but I'm asking the question because I know it's part of the process that an advisory council member has to pose, right? The process and the question. Is that true?
I think I guess I'm wondering, we might need a motion from someone from both bodies because we're kind of entering both bodies into session. So I guess I'd argue we would need a motion from an IAC member and a 2/3 vote from the committee, and then a separate motion from an advisory council member and a 2/3 vote from that body. So if for example, the interagency committee voted to enter executive session and the advisory council did not, then we could proceed as the IAC because this is a joint meeting. So I do think we would need a vote from both.
I tend to agree with that.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I have, is that okay if I ask a question now?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah, just so basically we are, one of us should move to verbalize the motion so that we can talk about this. And is there anything else that we need to know before making that motion? Just that I feel like I'm not sure if I should be doing the motion because I'm not sure what is it that I would like to discuss, but I understand that there's some sensitive information that you want us to know, right?
I think that what I would like to do is to share and provide, basically bring both bodies into in-depth legal discussions that are happening behind the scenes. And this information has not been shared previously because it's considered confidential attorney-client communications. And the reason why it's sensitive is because it relates to the legality of certain aspects of the law and some legal threats that have arisen, and wanting to, I think that because of recent conversations that I understand have happened at public meetings, it seemed like there was an appetite to discuss this topic. And so that's what we're trying to offer, is an opportunity to provide a legal position and legal information about this topic. But if once we're in the session, if there's information that you feel like you want to discuss publicly, we could certainly discuss that and how to protect that. So yeah, again, I'm not trying to be vague, but I don't want to provide more information publicly because that's would be the purpose of executive session.
So I moved to enter into the executive session. Is that what we need to do? Like one of us should say this? Okay.
Yeah, if you're comfortable with that.
Yeah, sure.
Would Mariana or someone else from the advisory council need to read this?
Yeah, I think we would.
Motion or?
Well, you could say that you support this this would be reflected in the meeting minutes. So you don't have to say it aloud, but if you want to read the motion, take a moment to read it and say that this reflects your.
Could you please say it aloud? I'm sorry, I can't see the screen. Please say it aloud.
Yeah, go ahead, Mariana.
Yes, I move to enter into executive session for the purpose of discussing confidential legal information with an attorney pursuant to 1 VSA section 313A1F. Do you want me to read the whole thing or just that?
I would, just for Jennifer's benefit
Okay.
too in the minutes.
And Jennifer, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. The executive session will be limited to discussing the definition of environmental justice focused population and associated legal issues with an attorney. Sharing this information with the public prematurely will put the AC and the IAC at a substantial disadvantage because they need to understand confidential legal risks to implement the EJ law. I move for A and R staff, including attorneys, to be present. Sorry, I feel like a robot.
No, that's thank you. Yep.
That was
Thank you.
great. Thank you.
So then we would need a second from a member of the advisory council and then to take a vote of just the advisory council members present.
I want to acknowledge that we do now have quorum of the advisory council as of when Trey joined the meeting. So
Okay.
we're set in that way.
And I would be happy to second that motion that Mariana provided. Thank you, Mariana.
So you want to do a roll call or how do you want to do it, Juliet?
Yeah, is everyone comfortable with doing a roll call and folks just say yes or no if they're from the advisory council, if you're comfortable with moving into an executive session? All right, Mariana? Great. Trey?
Yes.
Awesome. Jennifer?
Yes.
Okay. Brittany?
Yes.
Victor?
Yes.
Thank you. And Susanna? Susanna, I know you said earlier that you may be only able to communicate over chat today. You can also write yes or no in the chat if that's helpful.
Do you have 2/3 without her vote?
Yes.
Okay, you could put no vote because I think you've carried the motion.
Okay. Rachel just advised me that since Susanna may not be available at the moment, we can just put no vote, but this did carry the motion. We got over 2/3 vote of the currently present advisory council members.
And then, so for the interagency committee, does someone want to make a motion for the IAC? And I think because it's already been read into the record, you could probably just identify whether this motion reflects your position.
I'll make that motion. Dave Pelletier, AOT. Is that
I'll second
sufficient?
that.
Yep. Okay, and you got a second. Who was the second?
Thanks.
Abby, Agency of Agriculture.
Okay.
Just 1 second. I need to write this down before I forget. All right. let's do a roll call once again, this time with only IAC members. Carla,
Yes.
thank you. Dave,
Yes.
thank you. Abby,
Yes.
thank you. Grace,
Sorry, yes.
thank you. Stephanie,
Yes.
thank you. Claire,
Yes.
awesome. Elizabeth,
Yes.
awesome. Jenny?
Yes.
Jenny, just to clarify, are you able to vote or is Janet technically your seat?
I think we kind of share it. Before Janet, the previous chair delegated to me, and then I've continued to attend, and I think we vote as one, like, whenever we've been in a voting situation, only one of us has voted.
Okay. Carla, did you want to weigh in on that? Sorry to hold everybody up.
I mean, if Jenny is delegated, then that should be appropriate.
Okay.
I was gonna say that. Yeah.
Okay, Jenny, could you repeat what your vote was? Sorry.
My vote is yes.
Okay, great. And Susanna?
I vote yes. I'm sorry. I had to take a call that was unexpected, so I missed it before, but yeah.
No worries and no pressure. Thank you so much. All right, we're good to go.
Okay, great.
And then just a minute. I'm
Okay.
going to stop recording. Is that
Yes,
the appropriate
yes.
time? Okay.
All right, we're entering into executive session
Thank you.
and stop the recording.